Hey everybody, welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb. Welcome to another episode of whatever this show is called. My name is Sean Conroy. Andy Secunda is also here.
Thank you for joining me, Sean.
Today we wanted to talk about the pilot for a television program called The Shield, which debuted on March 12th, 2002 on the FX network, long before the FX network was not something that people would just go, what the hell is that?
It was really the inception of FX as we sort of know it today, of just a generally speaking darker equivalent to, at that point, more regular network TV, but even darker than most cable networks at that point.
And of course, this particular pilot, in a sense, has a lot to do with this show, because this was something that I had been trying to get Andy to watch for a while.
Yeah. Other than The Wire, really, your most consistently recommended show to me.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't
that I still call you every day and recommend. And you're like, I watched it already.
Yeah, The Wire, yeah.
And I'm like, you got to see it. You got to see it.
I understand. I've seen it.
But I pushed the shield on you. I said the pilot was great. And you refused to believe me.
Yeah, I had all the evidence in the world that Sean had great taste. And I still was like, no. And honestly, watching it again, even though...
Or watching it.
Watching it again, not even watching it for the first time.
Yeah. You just gave away the game. You let everybody know that you already watched it. You had never seen it before.
I had never seen it again.
Yeah,
I've never seen it. What's wrong with my brain? I had never seen it
again.
Do you want to include all this, man?
Yeah,
I was going to cut it. I don't like it. Where are we?
You had never seen The Shield until you watched it this time.
No. I think I had read the script a long time ago because a friend who was a showrunner type individual had said, read this script as an example of you want to think about hour-longs. Read this one. Mm-hmm. And I was impressed with it. I didn't really remember that much about it at the time, but it was shocking to me how well structured and dark this was, even in reference to all the things that were obviously followed in its wake. It's just insane. But yeah, weirdly, I think it was because it was so dark. Even though I love a cynical show, I love a cop show, I love all manner of sort of violent, shows that analyze corrupt systems. It still was just kind of like, it seemed like it was too much somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be in that world. And you were right. Once again, thus far, Sean was living in the pilot.
Right.
Really well done.
Yeah, I always forget when I rewatch the show just how dark it gets at certain moments. Like overwhelming, completely overwhelming.
Unbelievably bleak.
I always remember the way it ends and the hook there and all that stuff, which is dark, but which is bearable.
Right.
But there's stuff in between there that you're just like, oh my God, this is a horrible, horrible world.
Yeah.
So the pilot was written and created by Sean Ryan, who has done a bunch of other stuff. I hope we get to watch Terriers, which is a pilot that he created.
Oh, that was his?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it.
One of my favorites, although it lasted one season. Mm-hmm. The pilot was directed by Clark Johnson, who then, within a few months of that, directed the pilot for The Wire.
What a run.
Yeah. And he's done many, many other things since then. He ended up acting in the 5th season of The Wire. He was one of the newspaper guys. But great actor, great director. And of course, there's no way to look at this show and not think about how odd the choice of Michael Chiklis is as the lead on the show, just because of his prior body of work.
The standouts are really just in the Belushi movie and the commish, right?
I mean, I would also include Daddy-O, the sitcom he did, but only because I know somebody who was on the show, so I was very conscious of it when it was going on.
Right.
But yeah, he was kind of this chubby, silly, fun guy. And here he is playing this super dark character. I don't know how apocryphal this story is, But my understanding, and I could be completely fabricating this, is that they were casting for the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Chiklis had gotten his hands on a script somehow. And he was like, I really want to do this. I want to do this. I think I'd be great for it. And so his agents were calling the people who, the FX people saying, can you get him in for an audition? And they were like, this is a joke, right? Like, we're not,
The daddy?
Yeah. The commish? Come on. And so, but he had been going to the gym. He'd shaved his head. He'd lost some weight. He had a leather jacket that he was wearing, and he showed up, and they were like, holy shit, that's the guy.
Right.
Which is just kind of a cool story, whether or not it's true, because he is great on the show. In fact, this episode, the pilot episode, he won an Emmy for lead actor in a drama series. He was up against, I was going to make a joke. I have no idea who he was up against, so I'm not even going to try. So anyway, my understanding of the way that Sean Ryan had the idea for this show, and this is based only on personal interactions I've had with a variety of people in the business, and also the Wikipedia page about the show.
Yes, who you refer to as your best friend.
I mean, a lot of my friends are just Wikipedia pages. But supposedly he saw Donnie Brasco, and as he was watching Donnie Brasco, he was like, what if Al Pacino came in and shot Johnny Depp here because he knew that Johnny Depp was an informant?
So he felt it from the punchline of this episode, which makes sense. You can kind of feel that. But it is interesting because often I think when you have a moment at the end, either a pilot or a cliffhanger or a season ender,
mm-hmm.
and it's like, oh, they were building to this, you can kind of think back on, oh yeah, I guess that felt a little inorganic and that felt a little inorganic. I had read the script several, years ago. I didn't remember the end.
Well, I don't think there's anything that really gives it away.
Now that you have a sense maybe in the scene where Mackie's talking to that guy that it's
at the pool party.
At the pool party, like, oh, does he know? Does he not know? But you figure, oh, well, this will probably be a whole season arc of them trying to figure it out, whatever. So just that last thing is just an amazing shocker moment. Well, and there are at least 3 turns in this episode that completely caught me off guard, even with the benefit of this being so copied in terms of tone and structure since 2002. It still caught me off guard. I was like, wow, they're really just going for it immediately.
So starting with that big turn at the end, or not even a turn, it's the very last moment of the pilot, and catapults us into the series. There were interesting things that I was aware of at the time that, again, my best friend Wikipedia talks about, which is that they used Reed Diamond in all the publicity photos for the show.
Amazing.
And he was listed as a lead actor in the opening credits to the episode.
Right.
He was coming off a run on Homicide, and he was sort of a well-known TV actor.
Right.
Although we did just see him in the last season of Breaking Bad in one episode.
Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul. But, it was like, oh, this guy's going to be one of the main characters. And his story is so important to the episode. And it does feel like it's setting up that Serpico trope of this guy's going undercover and he's going to get to the bottom of everything.
Well, because they shipped Acevita, 60% of the way through the show.
When he has
and you're like, you forget that Acevita was setting him up to take down Mackie, which didn't occur to me until now, and I assume it's explored later.
Right.
Did Acevita sell out that guy? Or is that what? Well, we'll get to that. I have questions.
Right.
So that's interesting. But also, isn't Sean Ryan, I believe, coming off of Nash Bridges, had written this pilot like a way to get at, because he was sort of, shackled by network television. And Don Johnson, I think, wanted his character to be always heroic and honorable. And so he wrote this. It's just like, no one's ever going to make this. I'm just going to get this out of my system.
Well, and some of the stuff you read from him is that he put the shooting at the end of the pilot because he was like, nobody's ever going to make this, so I won't have to deal with the implication of that down the line.
Right.
I just want to get everything I can into the pilot.
And then Peter Ligori and Kevin Riley who were running FX, right? They were like, all right, well, this is where we're going to plant our flag in the sand and make this, which is really just a brilliant move of programming.
Yeah.
Because it did. That immediately set what FX was as the counter to everything else that was on TV.
It branded them, yeah.
Which is hard with even HBO already doing Sopranos to say, yeah, this is one step even further.
And the other part of the story that's interesting to me is that this is all based on, or not all, but some of it is based on a scandal in the LAPD from the late 90s, which was known as the Rampart scandal. It was a division in the LAPD towards downtown where they had an anti-gang unit called Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, also known as CRASH, the CRASH Task Force, who were very involved in gang stuff. But at a certain point, it became evident that a lot of the people involved in the CRASH unit were doing all sorts of nefarious things. They were involved in bank robberies, road rage murders. They were very involved with Death Row Records. They were paid to do security for Death Row Records at one point.
Amazing.
They were accused, it was never proven, but some of the guys were accused of being involved in the killing of Biggie Smalls. So there was just a lot going on. At one point, they were investigating these guys. More than 70 officers were implicated in all these things like unprovoked shootings and beatings, the planting of false evidence, stealing and dealing narcotics, bank robbery, perjury, and the cover-ups of all those things.
Otherwise known as community resources.
70 officers, more than 70 officers. Most of them never were charged or convicted or went to jail because the only witnesses were other guys like them. But there were 140 lawsuits against the city because of the activities of the CRASH unit. The city ended up paying out $125 million in settlements. And it resulted in the overturning of 106 prior criminal convictions. So, yeah, it was bad news. So Sean Ryan had that in his head when he started writing this thing.
Right.
That was one of the inspirations.
It feels like that had been done in movies, corruption in the police department to that degree. It feels like it had not been done in TV, because in TV, up until that point, FX being one of really the first forerunners of like, well, let's do something that's the alternative. If you're going to do network shows, then they're generally going to be more feel good kind of, situations. We're not going to get the size of audience we need unless, you can have, they had to say NYPD Blue and such, but it was, even that was
they were human, but they were good guys.
Right.
They were heroes.
Right. Exactly.
They might have had a drinking problem or bad relationships with their significant other, but they were heroes in terms of figuring shit out. So let's get into it.
All right, let's do it.
The cold open is Captain Aceveda he's going to talk to the press about what's going on in his district.
Yeah.
Crime is down. Meanwhile, that's intercut with Dick Mackey and his unit on the street, who are chasing down and eventually beating and humiliating a drug dealer who they strip of his clothing.
Yep.
Which is the reason why crime is going down.
Right.
I also, I know this is like really nitpicky, but I think it's interesting that the captain says, I took over 4 months ago and crime has been going down for the last 6 months. It's not even thanks to him. It's just like, that's what's going on. And the other thing that I really like in the cold open is that at a certain point, Aceveda's aide says to him, "Do you want your notes?" And he's like, "I don't need them." And then when Mackey grabs the drugs from underneath the drug dealer's testicles, one of the other guys says, "I have evidence baggies here if you want them." He's like, "I don't need her." So they're both kind of going, "I'm bigger than this job. I'm better than anything."
That's a funny touch.
But we get the sense of these guys out on the street and this guy in the station, him very involved in the press stuff and statistics, and these guys doing whatever it takes to take these people down.
And he immediately pockets the evidence.
Right.
And it's sort of just like right from what's again is amazing in a lot of the pilots we're discussing, even though they were from an earlier time, is how fast they establish everything you need in a non-spoken way. It's all visuals and behavior immediately. And him, chasing the guy down, police abuse, corruption, pocketing the evidence. You're intercutting with it, who's going to be his antagonist, we think.
He is.
It's just really impressive storytelling right off the bat.
Right. And I agree with you that they're doing a lot of stuff with visuals, but also there's just not a wasted word. Like every word is important. And then the cold open ends with the same music they would use over and over again for every single commercial break for the rest of the series, all 7 seasons. And it does set a certain tone. It's very much hardcore hip hop with a Spanish feel to it.
Yeah.
And it establishes that we're not in their world, they are in somebody else's world to a certain extent.
Right.
Because all these guys on this task force are white, clean-cut white guys doing this police work.
Right.
One of the things I think The Shield does really well is just B-roll of where they are all the time.
Yeah.
And it's always someplace that they don't belong,
Yeah. I do wonder, it being on FX at the time, what the level of budget was. It must have been far less, but it just has that feel of like making use of what's around and the handheld flavor of it. And by the same token, making the feel of shooting out on the streets work for you instead of against you.
Right.
Just this feeling of grimy authenticity.
So now we have Aceveda and we have Vic Mackey, 2 of our main characters. And we come up in the next scene on 2 of our other main characters, 2 of the sort of regular humdrum shoe leather detectives Wagenbach and Wims, who are at a murder scene of a woman who is naked and has gigantic artificial breasts. So that leads to some levity. Wagenbach is convinced that this is going to break easy. He's seen this kind of thing many times before. He's got it figured out. He knows exactly how he's going to figure out who did it. He goes outside to see the sister of the victim, who is overcome with grief and accidentally gets down on her knees in front of him as if he's getting oral sex from her. So
just again, it's such a crazy moment right off the bat of seeing something so horrible. There's a daughter involved, and the police are all so shut off to the actual human tragedy. They're just making
all snickering
at him, jokes.
Yeah. Right. They're snickering at him, and he's trying to help this woman while at the same time not be the butt of their jokes and whatever. And then, like you said, he learns that the woman had a daughter who's missing, and they go back inside and see a picture of her, and that's the big problem, is that this daughter is missing. And then we're back in the police station, which is a very strange setup for a police station.
Yeah.
They call it the Barn, which I think was at one point a potential name for the show.
Not as good a title, in my opinion.
Yeah. The vacant building. Apparently, it was a former church that was no longer being used. I don't know if that was a budget thing that they shot it there.
I mean, that's amazing because it almost has that feeling of people coming to terms with stuff, some kind of a confessional, some kind of people paying for their sins.
Uh-huh.
And there even is that one scene of Aceveda and Mackey facing off, and Mackey is below and he's above.
Yeah. He's walking up to the lectern.
Yeah. He's in heaven and Mackey's in hell. But
right.
At the end, they're even.
And the other thing it does is it sets up this cage in the middle of the whole police station, which is where they put so instead of at a normal police station, this is my understanding. I don't know if this is from personal experience. My understanding is that
Sean is pretending he hasn't done time.
that prisoners are sort of shuffled off into the back of the station. You don't see them once they're in their holding cells. But in this case, the holding cell is right in the middle of the open area out front. So you can see all the people when they're brought in.
Yeah.
Which leads to interactions over the course of the series. We find out the bathroom isn't working. The captain wants to see him. There's a bit of a confrontation. Then he goes up and we find out that Mackey has abused somebody that he was trying to arrest. He's used pliers on this guy, and they're lodging a formal complaint against him. But he says, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's good enough for the captain.
And I think that's the scene that his sign up to the captain is just keep smiling for the cameras, which is like that's what this episode is about, and you could say what this series is about, is like Mackie is putting people away. The crime rate's going down in this area, which they described in the press conference as a war zone, and he's the devil that the department has made to deal with, and that's why he's got so much support and he can get away with anything. He's basically, he's just running his own show, and he's saying that to the captain.
This is also where he tells the captain to fix the John. Like that's
another thing of just like, do what I need done.
Yeah. This is your job here, is to fix the bathroom. Then we're back with Wims and Wagenbach talking about how Wagenbach is interested in one of the uniformed police officers, Danny, and we then go to see him interacting with her. Yeah. He's attracted to her. He wants to ask her out on a date. And of course, in walk Vic and his right-hand man. And I find this scene so fascinating because they basically emasculate him by accusing him of looking like he's getting oral sex from a woman at the crime scene. So it's like, it's a weird reversal of the usual belittling of masculinity.
It's almost, and this is with most of the things that Mackie's doing, all of his bullying to the Wagenbach character in this episode, it's like not even thought out. None of the insults are great. None of his critiques are great. It's sort of like your evidence of what you're saying. It's just raw, big dogging. Like he's just pushing him down and bullying him. And of course, as I assume you're about to get to, is just like the subtext being that he is interested in Officer Soper and has had some.
They've already slept together. Yeah. So he's like basically saying, no, she's mine. Get out of here.
It's just, again, in addition to everything else, just like that he's such a friggin' animal. He's such a wild dog in every situation.
Right.
And just a dick. That's what's interesting is I certainly you can see the kind of person who would watch this show and just be like, yeah, that's my guy. That's my guy. And it's like, yeah, because he's the person who does whatever he wants at any point. The ultimate, sort of patriarchal kind of swaggering dick. So you can kind of see the appeal of that. But I am curious, when most people at the time were watching this, what do you think the experience was? What do you think the breakdown was of people who were like, this is a critique of this kind of person, and how many people were like?
I think if you look at stuff that was published at the time, it was vastly in his favor. I mean, I read a thing where Forrest Whitaker, who comes in several seasons later and plays sort of an Aceveda-like captain character who's out to get Mackie, as did Glenn Close at one point. Like they had a bunch of people come in as his opposition. And Forrest Whitaker was very frustrated because he was like, don't people get it that I'm the good guy?
Right.
And everybody just hated his character. And I can remember watching the show and not liking his character, even though I knew he was supposed to be the good guy.
Because at that point, it is an interesting storytelling tactic that it's like, even if you know the character that is driving the story is in the wrong, is morally incorrect, if they are driving the story and you're following the story through their eyes, you still are invested in them not being caught or hindered from moving the story forward. So you feel like that's my guy, even if consciously you're thinking like, well, he's a terrible person. And like Tony Soprano being the perfect example.
Right. I mean, he is the ultimate example, but so is Walter White. So is,
you're always terrified that Walter White is going to get caught.
Right. So is Al Swearingen.
Argue, even though Al Swearingen is obviously, incredibly dark character, at a certain point early on, he does seem to be set up as the caretaker of that town. So there is at least a split thing. And
but I guess that's what I'm saying is like, you see both sides of the story. So even though, I think Al is not as good of an example as some of the other people we've mentioned.
Yeah.
But you see the extenuating circumstances of this person's life that makes you go, well, he's not that bad. He's, and I think there are several moments
of Mackie's life.
Well, I was saying that in general, but I'm saying in Mackie's life, in this pilot, there are several moments that are set up for you to specifically go, oh, he's kind of a good guy. Like he is actually not a bad person. Like he's doing things that are actually good, you know?
It's very interesting. I guess we can touch on those as we go, or we can touch on them now. But it's like the first time when he's in the drug den, which is one of these moments, and he's like, "This kid's running around. Come on!"
Right. That's a great example where he's like, "You got to take care of these kids. Get them on video and want to make them, you know."
But that's why that's kind of like ridiculous. He's saying like, "You got to take care of these kids." He's not saying get them out of the drug den. It's like, no, I understand. You have your clients. You got to take care of it. And I don't want to put my own business in jeopardy by having you not have anyone here. He's saying, hey, just get him a video or get him a thing.
But I guess that's where it
put
comes
him in
in.
another room.
Yeah, that's where it comes in, though, that it's like he is drawing moral lines. They may not be the same moral lines that you would draw in that situation.
Right, I would
But
save everyone.
You're not in that situation. Like that's the whole thing, is that there's a scale of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Right.
And I do think that is an example of going like, oh, he does have some lines he won't cross, you know?
I'm kind of like Batman.
Yeah.
You know, I would, I protect the innocent, I punish the guilty.
You live in a cave.
I live in a cave. That's really the only thing.
You have a butler.
I have a very dimly lit, sad-looking place that I live. Those are the two similarities between me and Batman. Other than that, I'm Batman with no skills or money. But I was going to ask you, as we're also big fans, obviously, of Breaking Bad. Do you feel like the character of Hank Schrader, the brother-in-law in Breaking Bad, do you feel like, and it's almost like he almost looks like a parody of Mackie? This is our bald, squat bulldog, like a little bit racist, not a lot racist, and just sort of do what you have to get the job done. But in the end, more honorable than we think he's sort of set up as. Do you feel like he was set up consciously in some ways as a counterpoint to Mackie, or do you think it was accidental, or?
I mean,
he just looks so similar in terms of setup.
I could be completely off base here, but I feel like it's just a coincidence of casting.
Right.
I mean, because he's so great in that part.
Certainly.
And I think it's just a coincidence that he sort of has a similar affect to Michael Chiklis in terms of, like you said, shaved head, a little beefy. Yeah.
See, I wonder if it's just like that is the thing you have in your head is like, oh, we want to set up a cop that's going to seem like he's the ultimate antagonist,
right,
and then flip the tables in the end.
So we find out that Vic has slept with Danny before. He wants to sleep with her again. We also find out in that scene that he is married.
Yeah.
Then we're in a scene.
Which is another funny thing that almost seems like gilding the lily, although I like it. It's just sort of like, he's already such a dirtbag.
Yeah.
But to add to is like, also he cheats on his wife.
Oh, is your wife going to be there? Yeah. So then we see Terry, the Reed Diamond character, is driving the strike force around and sees Vic doing some kind of deal with a drug dealer at a car wash. And then we see Terry meeting with Captain Acevedo, who calls over the federal officer that they really want to go after this guy and get him. Are you going to do that? He's a little hesitant, but they'll give him a great job with the feds, which is just hilarious to me that anybody would be like, oh yeah, that's going to be great.
Yeah. What is your take on that, Sean? Do you feel like if you're a cop, you're one of these task force, and you're offered a job with the feds,
right?
Say in DC, the way it's presented.
I mean, DC is such a great town.
It's sort of strange. Isn't it?
Yeah.
LA.
I guess you have to buy. I mean, it's kind of a thing they blow past very quickly.
Yeah.
But you have to buy that he doesn't have a family. He doesn't have to worry about uprooting anybody.
I'm assuming
he doesn't have to. And he also has such aspirations of being a big shot in law enforcement.
He's more politically motivated.
That he's going to go work for the feds, whatever working for the feds is. I mean, is that FBI? Is that DOJ?
Right.
Is that CIA? Is that, I could go on, DHS? Is that TSA?
Sure.
Is that,
I mean, there are so many acronyms that he could be working.
Cut to him just checking people at the airport.
I want UPS. This isn't what I wanted.
This is not what I suspected it was going to be.
All right. Is this gate open? Ma'am.
So he agrees to do this. He's going to do it. He's going to take Mackie down. And he sort of hints at Acevedo that if he wants to be mayor, he better do a better job of lying to people. And so you see that not only is Terry aspirational by wanting to work for the TSA, but Acevedo is also aspirational politically.
Acevedo.
Claudette and Dutch, that's the first names of Wagenbach and Wims. They get some info from a fence and tell Vic that he needs to go get this guy at Monty's crack house, because Vic is known to be protecting Monty in his crack house.
Right.
And using him as a source.
Which it establishes again. Well, let's also take a second to just talk about CCH Pounder.
Yes.
It's interesting because even in this show, and it's so interesting looking at The Wire in comparison to this show, because I hold up The Wire in terms of acting on a cop show.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that if you even look at Homicide, one of the great police procedural shows.
I mean, it all starts with Kent McCord on Adam 12. Let's be honest.
Okay, let's go back to that.
Yeah. Leave it alone.
My Mother the Car. No, My Mother the Car wasn't one of the cop shows.
Car 54.
Car 54, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what I was going to say about The Wire immediately feels like it has a reality to the performances that is unparalleled by anything that came before, even by great cop shows.
Are you talking about the acting, or are you
The
talking
acting.
Okay.
Whereas in this show, I still feel like you can feel a little bit of the swagger and the posturing in the acting itself. It's all like what's so well written that it doesn't matter. CCH Pounder is a person who's so completely in control of her instrument, so subtle, and doing so much with such a subtle performance of this person who is like seen it all and has a certain amount of weariness, but is still doing the job and understands how she has to walk the line in this situation.
And we see a scene later on about her, making her peace. She's like, I'm never going to criticize another cop, basically, for the way they do their job. She doesn't do it that way, but she understands why people do at this point. Here's an interesting thing about CCH Pounder on this show, and I did not realize this the first 20 or 30 times I watched the pilot. There's dialogue that feels a little weird to me with her. And I realized the reason for that is because the part was originally written as a man, and her agents convinced Sean Ryan and the FX people that she would be great in the part, and they used her, but they kept the dialogue the same. So there's moments in this, I think there's 2 moments in this pilot where she says the word son, and it sounds like something an old dude would say, not something that she would say.
Yeah.
She at the part where he wants his ding dongs back, and she's like, give him his ding dongs back, son.
Yeah.
And then I think it's later when she says to Acevedo, do you know what you're doing, son? Or something like that. It just sounds like an older guy would say that.
It's a valid point, and I think you're right, because good on Sean Ryan and the other people involved who made that choice, because it really is like, it lends, sometimes you make a switch like that, and it's almost built into it, the script. And I think you raised valid points about those lines that are just sort of like, just slightly kind of, you crammed this in when it wasn't organically what you were thinking. This lends so much more nuance to it that she has both had to walk, this dance on either side of the situation of corrupt cops and good cops, and try and be a good cop. And also she's doing it in a man's world, and it's just like fucking putting her head down and doing what needs to be done. And she's tough and doesn't care. She also justifies why she's not. It's like Wagenbach, to a certain degree, Wagenbach does nothing, as far as we can tell, to elicit the amount of abuse that he gets in this pilot. The thing that he does is he doesn't quietly stay out of Mackey's way and bow down to Mackey. Not even in an overt way. It's like CCH Pounder is not being deferential in a major way to him. She's just quietly not getting in his way.
Right.
And that is all that it takes for the big dog to fucking come at you.
Okay, so they get Mackey to go to the drug house and get this guy, which he does. And while he's there, he tells Monty to watch the kids. They bring the guy back to the station, and he confesses. They solve the crime from the beginning of the episode. They know who killed the woman in the house.
Which is another interesting thing that they do in this pilot, because Wagenbach does seem like a little bit of a, just sort of an annoying schmo.
Well, his problem is he thinks he's smarter than everybody else.
But what's interesting in that series of scenes, and even a little bit in the later scene, is he is good at what he
He's
does.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
He's very good at interrogating. They even go through the process, which I thought was really, really cool, that it was kind of like they have these little breaks at times. He keeps leaving the room and coming back.
Well, he's playing the good cop. They did such a good job of, like, because I feel like usually when you see a show where there's a good cop, it's like, hey, you want a snack? And that's the extent of how good they are.
Well, that's also the advantage of doing it on FX is you can really take this time to. It's like, but the fact that John Ryan chose to spend that time on. All right, well, let me go get some coffee. All right, well, I'm just letting.
I gotta
sit there
call it out your mother's pills.
And so it's like showing that part of their approach is to wear them down with time.
Yeah. That's what they always talk about with those confessions that they get, is that it's just a matter of time, of keeping people sitting there. And if you sit there long enough, you just ultimately have to come out with something, and whether or not it's. So they get the confession, and we're not even halfway through the episode. We've already solved the crime. But of course, the problem is he tells them his daughter has been sold. He sold his daughter.
Just talk about bleak. Oh my God. He killed his wife and he sold his daughter.
Stay off the drugs, kids.
And it's a real lesson.
It goes.
It's weird when
Nancy Reagan was right. Just say no.
It's weird when Mackie at the very end turns to the camera and he says, "Hey, remember,
just say no.
Just say no."
Yeah. So then we see that they're interrogating the guy who bought the little girl, who is a younger guy who clearly has a weird pornographic affinity for. He has like subscriptions to weird magazines, and they confront him with all that.
He really dates it.
Yeah, right. That's true. That's where he gets his porn, is from the old trades.
Really getting a print version. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, really go for it.
But Dutch goes to get his ding-dongs, and that's the first time we find out that this whole thread is going to run through the rest of the episode of, I want my ding-dongs, I'm pissed about that. And it's another funny example of Dutch using jargon. He says, I know that I've got an organized, humiliation-driven offender, which just always makes me laugh when he uses those kind of terms.
That's really funny.
Why
don't you just say the suspect?
Yeah. And then Mackie basically denies taking his ding-dongs and takes off. And Dutch can't believe how come everybody loves this asshole so much. And he's right. He's right. Like, why does everybody love this asshole so much? And then we're back in the interview room, and this is where he starts to trick the guy and get him to think about, his homosexuality is genetic. Maybe having an affinity for younger girls is genetic, and it would be okay. And the guy sort of starts to buy it.
Which I guess if you kind of had a broken brain, or they've done all these tactics over time, I guess I can get it. He's someone who's emotionally sort of broken, but just seems to me like, that this guy's your opposition here. Why would you ever believe that he's on your side?
I would suspect that somebody with that kind of pathology thinks that there have to be other people with the same problem,
right. And they're so desperate for some kind of approval,
for somebody to recognize that they're okay,
right?
So, and I don't think you're wrong. I think it is a little bit pushed in that moment, but then they buy it back later by having the other guy immediately go, I know what you're trying to do. It's not going to work.
It is a great counterpoint to that.
Right.
That shows it's not always going to be that easy.
Right. So then we have Vic out on the street. He goes to see Miguel, who is complaining about him using pliers on his arm. And then we're back in the office, and the captain says, well, it looks like that guy dropped his complaint.
Yep.
Oh, I did like when Vic says, where's your lawyer now? Or something like that. Like, in other words, lawyers are not going to help you on the street. I'm in charge here. You don't get to do what you want.
Yeah. Which, again, that's one of the most depressing, cynical moments and it's so quiet. Mm-hmm. He doesn't abuse him. He doesn't do anything. He just shows up, and it's like, the system is in my favor. Mm-hmm. You cannot do anything.
Right.
And it's such connected to so much of the systemic things going on.
Right.
Obviously, even 21 years later.
Apparently, there's a problem involving the police.
That it's just It's just this quiet thing that is attached to a huge problem, but the show just simply states it and moves on.
Right. And then we're back in the barn, and the captain says, well, it looks like Miguel is not filing a complaint anymore. And he wants Vic to write him a report, and he wants the report tomorrow. He wants it as soon as he wants it. And Vic says, you'll get it whenever you get it.
Yeah. And
it's another great moment of confrontation between the two of them about the report that isn't really about the report in front of the entire station house.
And I think that is the moment when Azaveda is standing above and Mac is standing below. And it's just sort of this thing that's shifted for Azaveda to have power, looking down literally at Mackie, and yet Mackie is in control.
Doesn't care. Then we're with Danny and her partner, whose name is Julian, although I don't know that we find that out until the very end of the episode. And they're dealing with somebody whose tires have been slashed. And there's just a little comic moment there of like, I don't understand how somebody with a $30,000 car and $500 tires is standing in front of a $400 a month apartment.
Really, also a very funny scene, just like that they took this time to have a legitimately funny scene.
Right.
And then followed up with we get to the Paige Kennedy scene. Kennedy.
Who's Paige Kennedy?
You remember? Of Love 8 fame. It's on Holly Robinson Pete, and it might have been the pilot, but it was definitely in one of the episodes.
Wait, who is it?
Paige Kennedy, the guy who bought
who paid for the car.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that comes a couple scenes later. Yeah, which is also funny because he just goes, "Yeah, I slashed the tires." Immediately admits to doing it.
So my question on that, and Pony Boy, who's earlier in the thing, he immediately admits to having boosted the VCRs.
Right.
Is there a reason that they're admitting these things immediately?
Because there's just not time to get through all that. I mean, it reminds me of the stuff in like an episode of Law and Order.
Yeah. But
it would be over the course of the entire episode. You would first get to the guy who stole the VCRs, then you would solve the crime that was set up at the beginning of the episode. But in this show, they're going so much further with the crimes that are committed and with the sources of information they have that they just have to get through those as quickly as possible. Like, it doesn't help to have the VCR guy go, I have nothing to do with it. You just need the information to be out there.
I almost might have chosen to just cut the admission then and just put him in jail, and then we connect the dots, because him admitting it made me think there was some kind of situation, and maybe there is some situation where it's like, well, you already caught me, so I'm not going to waste time with that myself as the criminal. Because it made me think like, oh, there must have he knows she's going to let him off if he gives her information, so it doesn't matter.
Right. And the second one with the guy who gave the money to the woman for the car, Paige Kennedy.
Yeah.
Now known as the Paige Kennedy scene
from Love
He
great clubbing.
To me, that's just setting up Julian's character for the most part, and that he's smart and that he knows how to figure things out. And it's also comedic in a sense, because then the second beat of that scene is him at the station house taking off all his jewelry. And then he says, you'll get out of here if you can post a couple $100 bail.
I don't have
I don't have that kind of money.
So I can afford all this jewelry then. I don't got to explain myself to you.
Yeah.
Just really a wonderful comedic delivery, written scene, just like in the middle of this, just one of the most pitch black, like impossibly dark shows you've ever seen.
And doesn't really have anything to do with anything else.
It is just a one-off. Now, so going forward, we tend to avoid spoilers. This is not a spoiler. Going forward, do they tend to have like little one-offs and side stories and things, or is it just sort of stay on track?
I have not watched the show in so long, but I do feel like it's that kind of show where there is a bunch of stuff that happens just in every episode, but then an overall arc for the entire season and for the entire show.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's like ER in a sense, where a lot of the drama comes from what's happening in this particular episode with these particular people who are at the worst moment of their lives.
Right.
And meanwhile, Vic is out to get the Armenian money train or whatever. No. And so the next scene is Vic on the street looking for info. And I think this is an interesting scene just because first he's talking to a guy who's on the other side of an iron fence, and he convinces the guy to give him all the money he has on him, and then give me the rest of your money as well. Like he just robs this guy. Yeah. There's no way he could catch him if he had to chase him, but the guy just gives him the money.
This is the kind of thing that I would need. See, I wouldn't even just need a professional. I would need several professionals who are also corrupt, like cops that are corrupt. So I'd need to find them and find people who would be honest in order to get the truth, because that's the kind of question I'm like, the dealer, or actually it's not, that was a pimp. One. Yeah. The pimp is acting like when he asked for like, come on, give me your roll too. And he's like, that ain't right, man. And my question is it right? Is it like, what's the etiquette?
He's supposed to only give up a certain amount of money, and Mackey's asking for more than that.
Right. And so it's just like, I guess we're to assume that the dealer is correct. That it's just like Mackey is going too far, even in playing the game. Right. Everybody knows there's payoffs, but you're going too far.
Well, he does have lines that he will cross. I mean, that's the thing about Mackey is he'll go too far sometimes, even with a pimp.
Sure.
Who's on the other side of an iron fence.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a fence blocking him. How's he going too far?
He can't get any farther. And then he talks to the hooker. And again, this is one of those moments that I feel like they're buying him back. They're going, oh, he's actually kind of a good guy, because he gets the information he needs from her. Then he gives her money to get soup for herself because she's lost some weight, which he notices. Then he asks about her kid.
Right.
And says, here, take a little more money to go take care of your kid. He's a good guy. He's looking out for the kid. Then she is so touched by what he does that she responds in the only way she knows how, which is to be flirtatious with him. Yeah. And he declines that. Even though we know he's like a dog, he doesn't go for that. He's like, no, come on, get out of here. Go take care of yourself.
So he gives her more money.
So that, again, is a moment to me where there's like, oh, Vic actually does have certain things he'll do that make him a good guy.
But it is interesting because the earlier scene in the drug den, it seems like almost like a not really convincing way of showing he's a good guy. He's not doing anything to save these kids. Right. He's just put him a little bit away from the drugs. This scene, he is kind of going out of his way, even though she's sort of his snitch anyway. So you could argue that he's manipulating her in that way. It seems like the show wants us to sort of take it as you're saying it, which is, no, but he's giving her money and he cares about her kid and he's worried about, her health, probably more for the kid thing, which is, makes sense thematically because it ends on him being this avenging angel for a kid. But it is, to me, it's almost like I, as the viewer, not knowing more about Mackey at this point, just having watched this one episode that Sean Strike gave me to watch for years, I am more of the thinking that it's just like, is the show trying to convince me he's a good guy, or is the show saying he thinks of himself as a good guy?
I think it's more that than the other thing.
Right.
Right. Like he's trying to prove that he's a good person.
Right.
So you're right. It's not that the show is tricking us into thinking that he's a good person. It's like, this guy is a piece of shit, but he's trying to come across a particular way.
Which is what's so fascinating about the Aceveda arc in this episode, because it's like he is set up as the guy who's trying to change the system, and halfway through the show immediately sells that out. And you could argue for the greater good. The larger, greater good of saving the child, which is like, well, I can't dispute that, but it's so interesting that it's just like, nobody gets away clean in this. Yeah.
Well, and that is the very next scene. Well, it's not the next scene, but we see Dutch in the interrogation room. He's talking to the guy who sold the girl. He's still working the pedophilia angle. This is still the first guy.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how his daughter's friends dress up like Britney Spears. And, there's one of them that he's really into. And it's crazy how she looks. And then we see Aceveda and Wims in the office watching on the closed circuit TV. And Aceveda says, I didn't know Dutch had a daughter. And she goes, he doesn't. So it's like he's just manipulating this guy. And that's when Aceveda asks her about what she thinks of Mackey. Like, what do you think about Mackey? And we get to the thing about, he says he's Al Capone with a badge, which is just also to me a funny reference. Like, Al Capone is the thing you go to.
I love the Untouchables.
And then she says Al Capone made money by giving people what they wanted. So, in other words, Mackie is getting the job done, so it's okay that he does it the way he does it. Basically. Yeah. As long as he gets results, people are okay. That's when we get to Lamar admitting his vandalism, the great Paige Kennedy. Again, just a tiny bit of character development that Julian quotes the Bible to him.
Yeah. So he's really nice, though.
Yeah. Then we come back and we find out that this guy, I mean, it is so fucking dark, but it's played for comedy in a way that he has traded this girl for a girl to be named later, like the way they do with baseball teams.
Yeah.
It's just a very intense moment. So now they know they have another whole problem. They got to find this other person, whoever took the girl after the girl was with this guy. Then we're at Vic's house, and that's where we have the discussion about trust with Terry, where Vic talks about Terry talks about how trust is all you have. You got to trust people. And it seems like he's laying it on a little thick in that moment. I could really be of use to you guys. I could do more things. Let me in. Let me in. And it seems a little needy.
Now, just to jump the gun a little bit.
Yeah.
At the end, they have this montage just before.
To the music of the incredible Kid Rock.
Is that there? Is that when? Sorry, not the very end montage. Or is it? Is that
it's
the beginning?
The very end.
Okay, yes. So he shoots.
Bomb, diggy, bomb,
right.
Bomb, bomb, diggy, diggy. Yeah.
Really sets the tone.
I was waiting for him to shoot a Bud Light.
So when he shoots him, when he shoots Detective Crawley, in that scene.
Spoiler.
So then it goes to like clips of,
we see a
meeting with Aceveda and all this stuff.
Oh, right, the flashback moment.
But it doesn't really show. It doesn't show like someone observed it.
No.
Is it implying that in this pilot, not having seen further, and I don't know if you can give me the answer to this, is it implying that Aceveda sold him out, or that it's just because it's almost like looks like based on a note from someone, they're like, well, we don't want to leave them confused about how he found out or how he was sold out. And so there are these little clips of things we've already seen, but there's no hard evidence, as far as I can tell, of it saying this is how we figured it out.
My take on it is they're just showing why Vic would do this to him, and that Vic has a preternatural animalistic sense of when somebody is coming at him, and he knew this guy was doing it. Now, I watched the show 20 years ago, so I don't remember, but I don't think Aceveda sold him out, because I think Aceveda spends the entire first season.
Well, you don't have to say any more about it.
Living in a storage unit and trying to be king of Sweden.
This is not what I was expecting.
It's a twist in episode 2.
That's actually a spoiler that's very satisfying.
Yeah.
But so then that even more bolsters my perspective that maybe this was like just a note. They weren't going to spend any more money and shoot anymore. So it's like, well, maybe we just sort of imply stuff with these cuts that it's like just saying basically what you're getting at, which is like, well, he sensed something was off. But I guess that's my point. We already know he said something was off because he shot him. So we don't need to see anything else.
Right.
So I guess I'm just saying this was a critical mistake by Sean Ryan. That is why the Shield immediately failed to find an audience when they were outraged.
You should see some of the shit he did in Terriers.
But still, again, completely caught me off guard. Even though I was like, oh yeah, he might be in trouble. The fact that they end the pilot with that, I was just like, oh man, that's a good turn.
Right. So just stepping back for a second. So we're at this house party. Terry's laying it on way too thick. To me, that's the moment where Vic goes, okay, something's up with this guy.
Sure, for sure.
And I don't know how that gets him to, I have to kill this guy.
Right.
Because that seems like a bit of a leap.
I mean, I guess, again, you know more about this character than I do. My take would just be, well, if he had his instinct, it's not like he's going to be like, you know what? There's a 20% chance or a 15% chance that he's on the up and up, and I'm just not going to take that chance.
It also is, I mean, if you think about what's been going on, and this guy has been with them for a little bit, it could be that he's like, I don't know if he might have heard something or seen something he shouldn't have. We just got to make sure he's out of the picture, because now that I know he's coming after me, we might have already given something up.
Right.
You know. Then we're back with Dutch and the doctor, who won't fall for the tactic that Dutch used on the other guy. And that's when the critical decision is made by Captain Aceveda to get Vic.
Again, another thing that's sort of like, even if we take like Vic's move of killing him at the end, Crawley, as like, he doesn't know for sure, but he's got a sense that he's just going to follow his instinct and do this crazy extreme move. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same thing with Aceveda, where it's like, you know, Wagenbach saying one thing, Wims is saying another. They're both saying, well, I think this is the way to go. So it's a judgment call. And his judgment call is, well, I know if I send Mackie in there, we'll definitely get the answer, even though I may get the answer the other way. And so he makes this moral decision that's totally justifiable, even though it's like, oh, that's a big swing you're taking there in terms of what you're doing, which is basically what Wim says to him.
She says, you know what you're doing, son?
Yep. I think that only a man would say.
I mean, it feels that way.
I totally agree with you that there's a nuance to it that feels like an older guy, weary kind of guy on the force. But again, I think what's interesting is it feels like, and maybe this is the skill of CCH Pounder, what it feels like is that then the fact that it is a woman and a Black woman saying that line to him, like what that does is sort of it unifies that character in a slightly different way than we were perceiving her. I almost feel like that says that is a woman whose father was the kind of guy who would call this guy son. And she is trying to be like that guy who is an honorable guy. That is almost like, it's sort of, there's something in the use of that, the way that CCH Pounder delivers it, that to me does change the character and is like, oh, that's sort of interesting, but doesn't make me go like, oh, this is crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I also think it's interesting in that scene that she has a way that she knows they'll get this guy. If we let him go, he's going to lead us right to her. And Wagenbach has his way. He's like, we just keep him here. I can break him. I know I can break him. Like, it's two different approaches to the entire concept of police work. One is you just got to do the footwork, and the other is like, I'm smarter than them. I can make sure they tell me everything I need to know.
Which is another fascinating thing that I don't know thematically they're getting at, is just like a lot of this job is going to be like, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I know what I think and I trust my instincts, which is the thing you've heard again and again. It's a cliche in every other cop show and movie. Mm-hmm. But it's like, this is really playing it out with real stakes of like, this person could be right or this person could be right. And someone might die if you're wrong.
Right. And I also said footwork. I actually meant leg work. It's not like she's a soccer player.
Or a dancer.
Yeah. So Vic shows up with alcohol, a lighter, an X-Acto knife, and a phone book. The tools of every good torturer everywhere. And he says the pivotal line of the entire series when he's about to torture the guy, which he says, good cop and bad cop left for the day. I'm a different kind of cop.
Right.
Like, that is the definition of who this character is. He's not like anybody we've ever seen before.
Although you could also have the line be good cop and bad cop left. I'm the worst cop.
No. Yeah, absolutely. Although that then the guy would be like, so you're more bad? You're just a bad cop, but you're more bad?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. But then I guess also he saves a little girl in that scene. And that's where it's like, this is what's so genius about the way this is structured is it sets him up as terrible, corrupt, dark cop. It also sets him up as someone who is really cleaning up the streets and reducing crime. It also sets him up as someone who's completely self-involved. He's just an animal feeding himself with money and sex and just anything he wants at any moment.
Ding-dongs.
Relieves himself at someone else's desk. It also sets him up as someone who flouts authority, doesn't care about anything. So maybe in a good way, maybe gets a job done, maybe in a bad way. He's like, he's just making his own rules, sort of the classic thing. It's like there are these swings, and he cares about the kid, and he cares about the prostitute. It's like these swings back and forth throughout the whole episode. And what's interesting about putting the scene with the prostitute where it is it sort of leans him slightly back more toward that, then followed by saving the little girl, even though he's doing it in this way that's completely like abusing the rights of, granted, this psychopath. It's sort of like, okay, well, they're saying, he's a villain, but he's our villain.
Right.
And then it ends with another reversal.
Right. So, and so he also gets into in this scene, which I found interesting. He says to the guy, I have a daughter. She's whatever he says. She's 8 years old. She's 9 years old or whatever. And the guy's like, I would never do anything with your daughter. And he immediately turns that on him too and goes, oh, she's not good enough for you. You like this other girl. You don't like my daughter. And it's like, again, it's so dark that he's willing to go there, I guess. Then they find the girl in this horrific scene where they go into this, I don't know what it is, some kind of sub-basement or something. They rescue the little girl. They come back to the barn. Dutch is still trying to get Danny to go out with him. And she's this close to saying yes, but she says, I already have a date. And then she notices the smell of what turns out to be dog shit in the drawer of his desk.
Now, just to jump ahead again to the montage, when Danny goes to she has her gun,
right.
She puts the gun in the drawer, she's going on the date, then she goes to see this guy at the door, and then she goes back and gets the got. Is that implying, in your opinion, that she's like, this guy seems like he might be a little bit of a creep, I'm going to get the gun? Or is it just like, I want to be a cop all the time. I don't want to even leave the job at home for this date.
I don't even think it's that. To me, it's like, this is my approach to the world. I never feel safe. Like I never feel like it's okay to let my guard down. Right. So I'm taking this gun with me because who knows? He might not look like a creep. He just might be one, even though he doesn't look that way.
Right. So so that's sort of more on the first thing. Just like, you never know.
Right.
Because she's seen all the crap that she's seen.
Right. The world is a horrible place.
Yeah.
But we're in the dog shit scene. I call it the dog shit scene.
Right.
And again, I really like this. And it took me a second watching to realize this, is that Vic denies that he had anything to do with the dog shit. And of course, Dutch doesn't believe him and is like, you're an asshole. And Vic tries to embarrass him by saying, I'm not going to sleep until I find out who ate his ding dongs.
Yeah.
And then we see Aceveda having a conversation with Claudette and saying, I've heard there's this thing where when a cop gets too big for his britches, I forget if he says britches, but that's the way I say it because I'm from the 19th century. If a cop gets too big for his britches, they put dog shit in his desk.
Yeah.
And she goes, you heard that, huh? And then as she walks away, she smirks. And then later in the montage, we see that she has a dog, and we realize that Claudette was the one who put the dog shit in the desk. So she really was like teaching him a lesson of like, don't think you're smarter than everybody else.
It's pretty great. I did not connect that. That's amazing.
I didn't either, but like in retrospect, I'm like, of course it was her.
Right.
You know?
So is that an indicator of her being deferential to Mackie again? Or is that like she did with, saying, hey, we're going to your drug den, and basically subtext being, I know you have this setup, so we need to do this. So that was deferential. Is this another indication of that? Or is that
I think this is just about her relationship with Dutch.
Right.
Yeah. Like he's going, I know how to break this guy. I'm smarter than everybody. I know we'll keep him. He'll kill her if you let him go. Like he's basically saying your idea is fucking stupid. Mine is better than yours. Right. And she's like, well, how do you like this big pile of dog shit in your desk? Right. Which is, it's just that momentary smirk as she walks away from Aceveda that I didn't even see it the first time. And then you're like, oh,
amazing.
She is, it's her, It's very, very subtle. Except then you see the dog and you're like, oh, of course it is her.
A side note, again, who would do that at this point in time? That is such a major piece of information. It's really not.
To do it that subtly.
You don't, to do it that subtly. You don't need it, but it is like, it's a beautiful thing. Basically, you're leaving it for you who's seen it several times to put it together later.
Right.
What a gift.
Yeah. And
so brave.
And it says a lot about their relationship, it defines their relationship in a way that it has not been defined over the course of the episode.
For sure. And that she sees him as a sort of snot-nosed up-and-comer who's arrogant, and yet shows no evidence of that, because there's so many in this, and looking back on it, it would be more of a cliche to ever be like, kid, you don't get it.
Right.
And she doesn't do that at all. She's like, all right, well, whatever.
Yeah.
You want to say this thing about the ladies' breasts? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow.
Here's some dog shit. Then we're into the final montage, the what I call the Bob Rock montage. The strike team out on the job while everybody else is ensconced in domesticity, or at least their version of domesticity. And we get to see Danny getting ready for her date, Claudette with her dog, the sex worker on the street. Then we see them go into the house. They kill the drug dealer who's desperately trying to flush the drugs down the toilet. And then Vic, and I don't think we ever hear his name in this episode, but Shane is his right-hand man, Walt Goggins, who is just phenomenal in this show and phenomenal in Justified. They're in the bathroom. Vic takes the gun, shoots Terry in the face, and we're out on that. I did read somewhere that, it's very evident that he shoots him in the cheek.
Yeah.
And I guess Sean Ryan said somewhere, it's such a cliche to see people shot in the head because everybody's is a marksman. And I didn't want Vic to be like a superhero marksman. So he just hits him in the cheek,
It's really nice. I actually wondered if he was going to do the executioner thing of shooting him again.
I don't know if we want to talk about what happens after this.
In terms of the series?
Well, I do want to talk about what happens just over the course of the whole series. I won't, no spoilers, but just in the next episode when we come back from all this. Well, I'll let people figure it out for themselves. But I will say this show lasted 7 seasons.
Uh-huh.
And I think wraps up better than any show I've ever seen. The last 3 or 4 episodes of this show are amazing, and they're amazing for a number of reasons. One is they still are dealing with the implications of this incident that happened in the first episode.
Uh-huh.
And there's this thing now, and I guess Sean Ryan talks about this in some of the articles, but there's a thing now where you go into pitch a show and you're like, here's what happens in season 2. Here's what happens in season 3. Here's what happens in season 4. And this is how it wraps up at the end of season 5. And he did not have that stuff. He had a pilot in which something crazy happened at the end of the first episode.
Yeah.
And yet, through the writing process, over the course of the next 7 seasons, they discovered more and more about the characters and how they would react to these things and the actions they would take. And there were other things that happened in between, corrupt cop stuff and, as I said, the Armenian money train and all kinds of stuff that they get involved with. Kurt Sutter is one of the writers who later went on to create Sons of Anarchy. And so you know that there's going to be bloody, horrific violence whenever he's involved with something.
Right.
So there was plenty of that. But the last several episodes, and I couldn't tell you how many, but I think at least the last 3 episodes were written by Sean Ryan by himself because the writer's strike had happened by that time in 2007. And so because he was the showrunner, he was allowed to keep working on things. And I can remember walking the picket line, not to bring myself out as pro-union and on board with labor actions, but I can remember walking the picket line with a guy who was Sean Ryan's writer's assistant and him telling me like he had some ideas and I think those episodes are going to be amazing. And I was like, sure, whatever. And then it blew me away. Like it's there's a lot of episodes to get through, but I think if you have time, it's worth watching the entire series just because the ending of the whole show is incredible. So any questions?
Sean, how did you first discover The Wire? When did you watch it? Did you watch it when it first aired?
I can't say for sure, but I think I watched it when it first aired, and I certainly was on board very quickly after it started.
Another thing we didn't touch on is Walton Goggins in this.
Yeah.
Does he become a major character?
Oh, he's huge.
Yeah.
He's huge.
So it's so fascinating to look at, like, each character's like where they were in the arc of their careers, and he'd been like the heavy in so many different things, but he obviously is pre-Tarantino,
right?
And he's just
he also looks like he's like 12 years old.
Yes.
I mean, I was watching the pilot and I was like, oh my God, he was just a baby,
Yeah.
But he's so great in this, and he is pivotal. He has an incredibly important role throughout the whole series, because realize he is the only one who sees
everything
what Vic did that first night.
Right.
So he has the weight of that on himself as a witness versus the weight that Vic has of performing the action.
Yeah.
And there's all these other guys who are part of their team who don't know that stuff.
Yeah. It's very interesting watching this show 20 years later, having seen everything we've seen in the world. Mm-hmm. And I wonder even more what it would be like watching the whole series on that basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of propaganda and this being like, oh no, these guys are bad.
Right.
I also read somewhere, and again, I have no sources to cite, so best of luck if anybody's able to find this. But supposedly the idea early on with the show was that the guys on the strike team would not be particularly important, or I guess we now say important, that it would be more about Vic's relationship with the captain and the other detectives and all that. But then those guys were all so good that they made them a much bigger part of the show.
Yeah.
Walt Goggins and...
those characters were not
important.
But isn't that the sort of hub of Mackey's power?
I'm not sure how they saw it be constructed, because I think as soon as they got these guys in there, they were like, oh, these guys are great. We got to use them more. But I could see a dynamic that would just be about how is Wynn's going to use Mackey's services? How is he going to react to that?
I wonder, have you ever read what the influence of Training Day was on this?
It came out right around the same time. I think it was actually after I think it was after they shot the pilot. I could be wrong about this, but I feel like it was after they shot the pilot, but before they picked it up.
Yeah.
And they were like, it did okay in the testing, but not great. And we don't know if there's an audience for this. And then Training Day came out, and they were like, oh, there is an audience for this. Let's do this.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's well positioned. It's
right.
Like, well, you want to watch a whole series of that?
Right.
Do you hate Denzel Washington, but you want to watch that concept?
Right.
Nobody hates Denzel Washington.
No, how could they? He's a man on fire.
So I've heard. He's getting on his flight. Terrible follow-up. You can't take his glory away from him.
No, certainly. All right. Well, that's the Shield.
We did it.
I don't have anything else right now.
All right. Well, then we'll just say our usual catchphrase of watch your back on the streets. Oops.
It's not a resounding catchphrase. Also, tune in next time when we'll be watching Cheers.